Under the twin suns of Carith Vale, the days began in layers of light. The first sun rose pale and cold, laying a thin wash of silver across the fields. The second followed slower and warmer, turning the low hills amber and gold. Rowan Hale had lived at the edge of the settlement for 6 years, long enough to memorize the rhythm of both. His cottage stood beside a line of mineral-barked trees that chimed faintly when wind moved through them. At night, their leaves held a quiet blue sheen. He liked that light that didn't demand attention. Most mornings were the same. He calibrated irrigation lines, tuned soil monitors, repaired whatever the central grid neglected. He worked carefully, deliberately, a man who believed things lasted longer when handled with patience. The only thing that had disrupted his quiet routine was the woman who moved in next door. Her name was Elira Vine. She arrived without announcement, stepping down from a small transport vessel with one travel case and a crate of sealed botanical containers. She did not look around the way newcomers usually did. She observed, measured, absorbed. Elira was not human. The records listed her species as Aran, though most in the colony had never met one before. There were rumors about the Aran, planetary empaths, energy-sensitive, prone to long silences and deeper loyalties. Rowan tried not to stare the first time he saw her in daylight. Her skin carried a faint, natural luminosity, not glowing, not unnatural. Just a softness beneath the surface, like light caught under frost. Her features were fine without being fragile. Strong jaw, steady mouth. Her eyes were pale silver with a ring of muted violet near the iris that deepened when she focused. She dressed simply. Neutral fabrics. Sleeves rolled neatly at the wrists. The first week they exchanged only nods. The second week she spoke. He was kneeling by a broken field drone when her shadow crossed his hands. "You tightened the stabilizer unevenly," she said quietly. Rowan looked up. Up close he noticed the small details. The faint patterning along her temples, barely visible lines that caught light when she turned her head. The steadiness in her gaze. She did not flit her eyes away like someone unsure of their place. He glanced back at the drone. "It compensates. For now," she replied. She crouched beside him without asking permission. Her movements were precise. No wasted motion. She reached for the tool at his knee but paused a fraction of a second waiting for acknowledgement. He handed it to her. Their fingers brushed. It was brief, but not nothing. Her skin was cool at first contact, then adjusted, matching his warmth. He noticed because he was used to noticing things. They worked in silence for several minutes. When the drone powered on smoothly, she stood. "You prefer repairing to replacing," she observed. "It's quieter," he said. A small, almost private smile touched the corner of her mouth. "I prefer that too." That was how it began. Not with fireworks. Not with declarations. With shared preferences. Over the next few weeks, their routines began to overlap. She worked with plant specimens behind her home, strange, low-growing vines that seemed to respond when she touched them. Rowan found reasons to be outside more often. He brought her a replacement filter when her water recycler sputtered. She returned the favor by recalibrating his soil sensors without mentioning it, leaving them slightly more efficient than before. One evening, as the suns lowered in layered gold, she stood at the fence dividing their properties. "You watch the sky every night," she said. "It changes," he replied. "So do you," she answered almost absently. He wasn't sure what she meant. She didn't elaborate. The first time he noticed his attraction was not dramatic. It was when she laughed. A small thing had startled one of her glowing seedlings into dimming unexpectedly. She made a quiet sound, low, unguarded, not musical, not staged, just real. He felt it settle somewhere under his ribs. After that, he began noticing more. The way she adjusted her sleeve before lifting something heavy. The way she tilted her head slightly when listening, as if aligning to the speaker. The way her gaze lingered half a second longer than necessary when their conversations ended. She did not flirt. She did not perform. She simply stayed. And Rowan found that he looked for her steadiness at the end of every day. The first time she came to his porch after dark, he knew something had shifted. There was no emergency. No visible reason. She stood in the dim wash of blue tree light. "You left your workshop light on," she said. "I was coming back to it." She nodded once. But she did not leave. He waited. Finally, she stepped closer. "The energy lines beneath this settlement are irregular," she said quietly. "Have you felt it?" He had. A subtle interference in certain tools, a hum in metal during colder nights. I assumed it was the grid. It is deeper than the grid. The air between them felt heavier, not tense, but charged. She rested her palm flat against the wooden porch railing. The wood gave a faint vibration. Rowan stepped closer without thinking. "Alira," he said carefully, "what aren't you saying?" Her eyes shifted, violet deepening almost imperceptibly. "My kind undergoes a planetary attunement cycle," she said. "It is biological, but also environmental. We synchronize with the world's magnetic structure." He held her gaze. And I did not expect to enter it here." The wind moved through the trees, carrying a low chime. He noticed she wasn't afraid. Concerned, yes, but not afraid. "Does it hurt?" he asked. She considered that. Not physically. Something in her restraint moved him more than panic would have. He reached for her wrist, not urgently, just steadily. "Then we'll monitor it," he said. "Together." She looked down at his hand. He realized then how rarely he initiated contact. Her skin warmed under his touch. "You assume I will let you stay close," she said softly. "I am not good at leaving," he replied. That earned him a look he would remember for years. Not dramatic, not overwhelmed, just open. She stepped into his space deliberately this time, close enough that he could see the subtle shift in light beneath her skin, close enough to feel the faint hum he had begun noticing over the past few nights. Her hand rose slowly, giving him time to move away. He didn't. Her fingers rested lightly at the center of his chest. Her breath caught. "It is already linked," she murmured. "What has?" "The attunement." He exhaled slowly. "Is that dangerous?" "For you," she said honestly. "Possibly." He did not pull away. The moment stretched significant in its quietness. She lowered her hand but did not step back. Instead, she leaned her forehead briefly against his shoulder. The gesture was small, but intimate in a way words never are. He rested his hand at the middle of her, back steady, grounding. They stood like that until the second sun disappeared completely. The resonance began 2 nights later. A low-frequency hum rolled through the ground. Rowan's tools vibrated in uneven rhythm. Lights flickered. Alira's home shimmered faintly along its edges. He didn't hesitate. He crossed the field. She stood outside, palms raised slightly as if balancing something invisible. Her skin carried a brighter undertone now, not glowing wildly, just intensified. Her eyes found his immediately. "You should not be here," she said. He ignored that. "What do you need?" The ground pulsed. She swallowed once. "The planet is pulling too strongly. The magnetic lines here are fractured. My cycle is amplifying the instability." He stepped closer. Each step made the hum louder but also steadier. Her gaze sharpened. "You were stabilizing it," she realized. He didn't understand how. He only knew that when he was near her, the vibration in his chest matched the one in the ground. "Then we use that," he said. Fear flickered across her expression, not for herself, for you. He reached for her hand. Not urgent, not desperate, deliberate. "I am not fragile," he said quietly. Their fingers laced. The surge in the air softened. They moved together toward the ridge beyond the settlement where the magnetic disturbance peaked. The earth there glowed faintly along a shallow fracture. Alira knelt. Rowan knelt beside her. "Breathe with me," she said. He did. The resonance swelled light, rising in a controlled arc instead of a violent surge. She leaned slightly into his shoulder, not for romance, for balance. He felt the strain moving through her body. Without thinking, he shifted closer, bracing her weight. The energy steadied further. "You anchor," she whispered. "And you guide," he replied. The fracture sealed slowly, the glow dimming from chaotic blue to quiet gold. When it ended, the forest was still. Alara sagged forward. He caught her before she touched the ground. For a moment she looked up at him. Not luminous, not alien, just tired. "You stayed," she said. "Yes." Her hand lifted weakly to rest against his jaw. No grand confession, just that touch. He covered her hand with his and held it there. The colony would argue later. There would be suspicion, questions about the Aaron and their cycles. But in that moment, none of it mattered. The resonance had not taken her. It had not taken him. It had bound them quietly, irrevocably. Under the twin moons of Carith Vale, Rowan carried her home. Not as a savior, not as a martyr, just as a man who had chosen not to step back, and she, resting against him, did not let go. He carried her across the field slowly, adjusting his stride to keep her steady. One arm beneath her shoulders, the other braced at her waist. She was lighter than he expected, though not fragile. Even exhausted, there was density to her, a groundedness that felt older than the colony itself. The night had gone very still. The mineral trees no longer chimed. The hum beneath the soil had quieted to something almost indistinguishable from wind. When he reached her door, it slid open at her proximity, interior lights rising to a soft, neutral glow. He laid her down on the narrow resting bench near the window, the place where she usually sat to study her plants. For a moment he remained standing over her, unsure whether to leave, unsure whether staying would worsen whatever bond had formed between them. Her fingers shifted slightly against his sleeve, a subtle resistance to the idea of distance. "Stay," she said without opening her eyes. It wasn't a plea. It was a simple assessment of what was needed. He pulled a chair close and sat, forearms resting on his knees, watching the faint light beneath her skin ebb and settle into something steadier. After a long while, her breathing evened. The intensity that had sharpened her features softened, leaving her looking younger, almost human in her stillness. He found himself studying the quiet details again, the slight curve of her mouth when at rest, the nearly invisible pulse at her throat, the way her hand remained angled toward him even in sleep. It did not touch her again that night, but he did not move away. By morning, the colony had noticed the change. Tools functioned normally. The irregular interference in the grid had flattened into background noise. Word traveled quickly that the disturbance near the ridge had ceased. There were questions, of course. There were always questions when something unknown quieted instead of exploding. Rowan returned home only long enough to wash and change before coming back to her. She was sitting upright now, wrapped in a simple gray blanket, hair loose over one shoulder. The luminosity in her skin had dimmed to its usual subtle undertone. When she saw him in the doorway, she did not smile broadly or rush to him. She only exhaled, as if confirming a calculation. "You are still here," she said. "Yes." He stepped inside. "How do you feel?" She considered the question carefully. "Stabilized," she replied, "but altered." He understood that. He felt it too. A faint awareness beneath his sternum, like a low echo responding to something just outside audible range. Not painful. Not intrusive. Present. He crossed the room and poured water into a glass from her counter, handing it to her without comment. She accepted it, their fingers brushing again, less electric now, but deeper somehow, like a current that had found its path. "The cycle should have overwhelmed the fracture," she said quietly. "Instead, it aligned." He leaned against the wall opposite her. "Because we split the load." Her gaze lifted to him, searching. "That is not how attunement works," she said. "It is now," he replied. The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, but close. Later that afternoon, members of the council arrived at the ridge with scanning equipment. Rowan and Alara stood together as readings were taken. There were suspicious looks, measured tones, words like anomaly and risk. Alara did not shrink beneath them. She stood with her shoulders squared, hands loosely folded in front of her, eyes calm. Rowan remained at her side without touching her, but close enough that their shoulders nearly aligned. When one counselor suggested temporary relocation for safety, Rowan answered before she could. "The instability is gone," he said evenly. "You can see that." Alara did not contradict him. She simply shifted half an inch closer, a subtle acknowledgement of solidarity. In the days that followed, life resumed its visible routines, but something fundamental had shifted between them. They did not speak about the night at the ridge in dramatic terms. There was no retelling, no reframing. Instead, the changes showed themselves in smaller ways. She began leaving her door open in the evenings. He stopped knocking and simply stepped inside when he saw the lights on. When she worked in her garden, he found tasks that kept him within sight. One evening, as the twin suns lowered again, she stood beside him at the fence where so many of their early conversations had taken place. "You could have been harmed," she said without looking at him. "I was," he replied. She turned slightly. He placed her hand over his chest. The faint resonance stirred under her palm, subtle but undeniable. "It isn't damage," he said. "It's integration." Her eyes darkened at the edges, violet deepening. She stepped closer until there was no space between them. This time, when she leaned into him, it was not from exhaustion or necessity. It was deliberate. He wrapped his arms around her without hesitation, feeling the steady warmth of her body align against his. No dramatic confession followed, no promises spoken aloud. Instead, she adjusted her position slightly, fitting herself more securely against him, and he tightened his hold in response. The gesture said enough. That night, when the second sun disappeared and the moon's rose, they remained outside longer than usual. The colony lights flickered in the distance, ordinary and unremarkable. Beneath their feet, the planet was calm. "The attunement is not over," she said quietly. "It has simply reached equilibrium." He nodded. "Then we maintain it." She tilted her head, studying him the way she had the first day beside the broken drone. "You choose this knowingly?" "Yes." A long pause stretched between them, comfortable and unforced. Then she reached for his hand, not tentatively, not testing, certain. Their fingers laced easily like a habit already formed. The hum beneath his ribs answered hers in a steady, synchronized rhythm. Under the twin moons of Careth Vale, they stood at the edge of the settlement, not as anomaly and witness, not as alien and human, but as two presences that had decided, quietly and without spectacle, to remain. The equilibrium held through the next rotation and the one after that. Nothing dramatic announced it. No storms, no ruptures in the soil. The change expressed itself in absence, no tremor beneath the ground, no interference in the grid, no metallic taste in the air. The colony relaxed in increments. Tools functioned, crops stabilized. The ridge where the fracture had sealed became simply another rise in the land, unremarkable to anyone who had not knelt beside it in the dark. Rowan returned to his maintenance schedules. Alara resumed her cultivation work, but the space between their homes was no longer a boundary. It had become a corridor. He moved through it without thinking. So did she. Some evenings, they worked separately, but within sight of one another, a quiet alignment of movement across the field. Other nights she joined him in his workshop, sleeves rolled, examining circuitry with that same precise focus she'd shown the first day. She asked fewer questions now. Instead, she adjusted components subtly while he observed. When their shoulders brushed, neither commented. The contact was no longer charged with uncertainty. It carried recognition. One morning, Rowan woke before first light, with the faintest vibration under his skin. Not alarm, not pain. Just awareness. He stepped outside and found Alara already in her garden, bare feet in the soil, eyes closed. The pre-dawn sky washed her in gray-blue, muting her natural luminosity until she looked almost entirely human. He did not interrupt. He stood a short distance away until her eyes opened and found him. "It shifts at sunrise," she said quietly. "The planet breathes differently then." He nodded once. "And us?" She considered that. "We are included." He crossed the remaining distance and stood beside her. This time when their hands met, it was unconscious. Fingers aligning as naturally as their breathing, the vibration steadied. Neither spoke further. The colony's suspicion did not vanish, but it dulled. Curiosity replaced fear. A few settlers approached Alara with cautious questions about soil patterns, about the improved yield in certain fields. She answered without defensiveness, explaining magnetic stabilization in simple terms, never claiming credit. Rowan watched the exchanges from a distance, noting how she adjusted her posture, never looming, never retreating. When someone's tone sharpened with doubt, he stepped closer. Not confrontational, just present. She noticed every time. Later, in private, she would rest her forehead briefly against his collarbone in silent acknowledgement. Weeks passed. The resonance between them became less noticeable in daily life and more foundational. Tools hummed slightly when he held them, but only for a breath. Plants leaned subtly toward her when she entered the garden. Neither phenomenon escalated. It was as if the planet had accepted the alignment and filed it under normal. One evening, rain moved across Carithvale in a long, slanting sheet. The mineral trees chimed in irregular patterns as droplets struck their hardened leaves. Rowan's workshop roof amplified the sound into a soft percussion. Alara stood in the doorway watching the rain with an expression he couldn't immediately read. "On my world," she said. Storms carried harmonic resonance. You could hear the planetary core adjusting. He joined her at the threshold. "And here." She tilted her head, listening. The rain shifted pitch slightly as wind redirected it. "Here it is quieter," she said, "but no less alive." He stepped outside first, into the rain, and turned back toward her. It soaked through his shirt immediately, plastering fabric to skin. She watched him for a beat, then followed. Water beaded against her luminous undertones, sliding along her jaw, catching briefly at her lashes. She did not laugh. She did not gasp. She simply stood facing him in the rain as if recalibrating a variable. He reached up and brushed a strand of wet hair away from her temple. The gesture was slow enough for refusal. She did not refuse. Instead, she lifted her hand and pressed it flat against his sternum again, as she had the night the attunement linked. The resonance answered softly. Not a surge, not a flare, a steady chord. "You are still anchoring," she said. "So are you," he replied. Rain ran between them, cooling skin, grounding heat. She stepped closer until their foreheads touched. The contact was gentle, sustained. No urgency, no spectacle, just confirmation. When the storm passed, they remained outside until the clouds thinned and the twin moons reappeared. In the following months, their lives intertwined in ways that required no announcement. She moved a small table from her home into his workshop. He installed additional grow lights along the border of her garden. Their schedules synchronized without negotiation. The colony gradually stopped referring to her house and his house separately. It became simply their end of the field. One afternoon, a minor fluctuation rippled through the grid, a distant solar disturbance brushing the planet's magnetic field. Instruments flickered. A faint tremor passed underfoot. Rowan felt the resonance stir instantly. He was already moving toward her before the first alert signal sounded. She met him halfway between their homes. No words were exchanged. Their hands found each other automatically. The tremor eased within seconds. The grid stabilized. Around them, colonists looked outward toward the horizon, scanning for cause. Rowan and Alara simply stood still until the ground settled fully. "We respond faster now," she observed. "We respond together," he corrected gently. Her gaze held his, a fraction longer than necessary. "Yes." Time continued forward. Seasons shifted. The mineral trees shed and regrew their glass-like leaves. The ridge where the fracture once glowed sprouted low, hardy growth that seemed subtly healthier than surrounding land. People began walking there in the evenings without realizing why it felt calmer. Rowan and Alara sometimes joined them, sometimes remained apart. Their closeness had lost its novelty and settled into fact. Late one night, long after the settlement lights dimmed, Rowan lay awake with Alira's head resting against his chest. The faint resonance pulsed in an even rhythm beneath his ribs. Her breathing synchronized unconsciously. He stared at the ceiling, aware of the vast planetary core turning steadily miles below. "It will not always be stable," she said softly, eyes still closed. "Planets shift. People change." He slid his hand along her back, steady and slow. "Then we adjust," he answered. She opened her eyes and looked up at him. Not luminous, not alien, simply certain. She shifted slightly, fitting closer, her hand resting over the point where the resonance lived. "You chose not to leave," she murmured. "I still choose it," he said. Outside, Carithvale slept under twin moons. Beneath the surface, magnetic lines flowed in quiet alignment, and in the small house at the edge of the settlement, two steady heartbeats maintained a balance neither of them had expected, but neither would relinquish. The years did not announce themselves as they passed. They accumulated in small adjustments, the addition of a second workbench in Rowan's workshop, the expansion of Alira's garden into a shared greenhouse structure that caught both sons at different angles. The corridor between their homes became a worn path, flattened not by urgency but by repetition. The resonance that once felt extraordinary settled into something almost indistinguishable from instinct. Rowan no longer paused to notice it each morning. It simply existed, like breath. Alira no longer monitored the magnetic lines with the same guarded intensity. She listened, yes, but without tension. The planet had folded them into its rhythm. There were moments when the equilibrium was tested. A deep core mining operation, approved by the council on the far side of the valley, sent faint, irregular tremors through the ground. Instruments registered fluctuations that would have gone unnoticed before Alira's arrival. Rowan felt the first disturbance as a low tightening beneath his sternum. By the time he stepped outside, she was already there, gaze fixed toward the distant excavation site. "They are drilling too aggressively," she said quietly. He nodded. "We'll talk to them." The conversation that followed was measured, not confrontational. Rowan presented the data. Alira explained the long-term implications in precise, unemotional terms. She did not dramatize. She did not threaten collapse. She simply described the balance and how easily it could be undone. The miners adjusted their depth and pace. The tremors eased. That evening, back at the ridge, Rowan stood beside her watching the sky transition from gold to indigo. "You could have forced compliance," he said. "Yes," she replied, "but force fractures more than stone." He glanced at her. "You've changed. So have you." She reached for his hand, not out of need, not out of fear, just because it was there, their fingers intertwined with the ease of long practice. The resonance answered softly, a low chord beneath thought. Time continued to press forward. The colony expanded, new structures rising beyond the original settlement. Children grew up knowing Alira not as anomaly, but as part of the landscape. Some evenings they wandered into her greenhouse, watching the faint luminescence of her cultivated plants. She answered their questions patiently. Rowan would lean against the doorframe, observing her in that quiet way he always had, taking in the way her posture softened around curiosity, the subtle warmth that surfaced beneath her skin when she listened closely. There was no spectacle in their affection. It lived in gestures so small they would have gone unnoticed by anyone not looking. The way he set her preferred tools within reach before she asked. The way she adjusted the collar of his jacket before meetings with the council. The way they stood shoulder to shoulder when decisions were made. A silent line of agreement between them. One winter cycle, when the first sun lingered lower and the air sharpened with frost, Rowan fell ill. It was not dramatic, just exhaustion compounded by infection, but it unsettled the resonance in a way neither of them had experienced. Alira felt it immediately, a thinning of the steady cord beneath her ribs. She stayed at his bedside without announcement. No visible panic crossed her face. She monitored his breathing, adjusted hydration levels, regulated the room's temperature with quiet precision. When he stirred in fevered half-consciousness, she rested her palm over his chest, anchoring the rhythm back into steadiness. "You are not allowed to destabilize without warning," she murmured once, almost dryly. Even in weakness, he exhaled something like a laugh. He recovered slowly. The resonance thickened again, stronger for the strain. Neither of them spoke about the fear that had hovered at the edges of those days. It did not need naming. After that winter, they began spending more evenings at the ridge. It had changed subtly over time. The soil there supported plant life with unusual resilience. A small grove had formed nothing unnatural, just quietly thriving. They would sit side by side, sometimes speaking, often not. The planet beneath them felt vast, but not indifferent. "There will come a time," Alira said one dusk, "when my cycle will reach its final phase." Rowan did not look at her immediately. "Final how?" "Aaron do not age as humans do. We transition. Our physical form returns its energy fully to the planetary field we are bonded with. He absorbed that without visible reaction. And me? She turned to him. You are already integrated. He held her gaze. So we adjust, he said after a moment. A faint warmth passed beneath her skin at that. Yes, she answered. Years later, when Rowan's hair silvered and his movements slowed, the resonance had become inseparable from his physiology. Instruments in the lab detected a faint, stabilizing field wherever he spent extended time. The colony had long since stopped questioning it. They had begun referring to the ridge as simply the heart line. Alira aged differently. Her features remained composed, luminous undertones steady, but something about her grew lighter, less tethered to gravity. One evening, beneath the twin moons, she stood facing him at the ridge, hands resting gently in his. The air was calm, the magnetic lines smooth as glass. It is time, she said, not sorrowful, not fearful, certain. He stepped closer until their foreheads touched, just as they had in the rain years ago. I'm not leaving, he said quietly. Nor am I, she replied. The resonance rose, not violently, not in rupture. In completion. Light gathered faintly around her outline, subtle as breath on cold air. He felt the shift within himself, a widening rather than a tearing. Her hands tightened once in his. You anchored, she whispered. You guided, he answered. The light diffused gradually, not upward but outward into soil, into root, into the deep magnetic current beneath the ridge. Her physical weight diminished beneath his palms until there was only warmth, then air. He did not fall. The resonance remained steady, intact. Different, but not absent. Rowan stood alone beneath the moons, though not solitary. The planet felt full. In the months that followed, he continued his work. The greenhouse thrived. The colony expanded responsibly. When tremors brushed the valley, they quieted quickly. People said the land itself seemed to correct. Rowan spent most evenings at the ridge. He would rest his palm against the soil and feel the answering chord rise through him, subtle, familiar. Years later, when his breathing grew shallow and his steps careful, Rowan walked the path to the ridge one last time. The grove had thickened there, roots woven deep into the soil that once split open. He lowered himself slowly back against the trunk of the tallest tree and rested his palm flat to the ground. The response was immediate. Not a surge, not light, but a steady warmth rising through him, familiar as her hand at his chest. The twin suns slipped beneath the horizon in quiet gold, and the moons took their place without ceremony. Rowan closed his eyes, not searching, not calling, simply aligning. The resonance gathered around him, through him, until the boundary between pulse and planet thinned to nothing at all. His final breath left him without struggle. The grove stirred softly, leaves chiming once in the cooling air. Beneath the surface of Careth Vale, the magnetic lines held steady, and at the heart line, nothing ended. The cord they had formed remained, carried forward in the turning of the world.